Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, I'll be reviewing some of the buffs and nerfs and changes that rogues have gotten in their Covenant abilities, as well as a small update primarily centered on Outlaw rogue in this recent Wednesday update. Now, Blizzard did do a full character wipe for everybody on the beta, so whether you had characters leveling on the Maw or Orbos, or if you had a max level character on Torghast, all those legendaries, all that gear, everything was gone. So I'm gonna have to be doing this on a fresh character. But it's a perfect opportunity, as I'm about to choose my Covenant, to check out all the different Covenant abilities to see kind of how impactful they are and how they feel to play overall in general, especially with the recent buffs and nerfs. First, let's talk about the buff that happened for Outlaw, and this is going to be not really a buff, but rather a change, but I think it's still for the better. We have a blue post in this week's build in Shadowlands beta. We have notable changes to Outlaw, since both Assassination and Subtlety can apply poisons in AoE relatively easily. We want Outlaw to have similar utility. As such, Blade Flurry hits now apply poisons to any enemy's hit, which is huge because as Outlaw you kind of had to alt tab between targets when you're trying to apply poisons. If you want to maintain, let's say, numbing poison on one character in a dungeon and there's another cast, you have to swap, hit him a couple times until you get the proc, and back and forth, and it was kind of just, you didn't really try it super hard. But if, let's say, you were trying to time a key and really trying to try hard, you really would go the extra mile to try to do it. So now if I, let's say, put a focus on this target right here, who's we'll mark with X, just so you guys can see, and you can see it's reapplying over and over. This is huge because this is going to allow Outlaw a couple things. First of all, in dungeons, maintaining poisons is going to be far easier. Second, in PvP as Outlaw, if let's say you're doing arenas, cleaving enemies together will apply the poisons as well, which is huge. Being able to apply it much easier for Outlaw is finally going to give it a little bit of a leg up where the other specs were really good at that aspect. Another change that Blizzard has done is with Between the Eyes. In the past, Between the Eyes was an ability that increased your crit damage to an enemy, but it didn't really work, it didn't really pan out as well, and it kind of didn't work with your Blade Flurry as well. The problem with that was that when you applied the debuff, the Blade Flurry, when you Blade Flurry an enemy, only the enemy you're attacking would take extra damage, but the Blade Flurry wouldn't be able to replicate that damage splash. With a change where critical strike chance from rogue is increased by 20 instead of crit damage, Blade Flurry can now evenly apply more crits to splash out nearby enemies a little bit better. With this playstyle, you might actually have like a minimum of crit or a maximum of crit to reach. It'll be interesting where the spec will go from here on in terms of the stats. But I think this will probably end up being better for the spec. Numbers haven't been finalized at all, so it's not like we have data to back this up yet, but so far it feels pretty good to play. Next, we have some massive updates to Covenant abilities. It looks like the king with the Necrolord Covenant has been dethroned. So if you were to test out the Covenant ability for the Necrolord right now, you'll find out that actually the damage severely changed. To give you a comparison of how much weaker this is before, so prior to this, the way this ability scaled was it used to be the initial hit 60% of attack power. Now it's 30% attack power initial hit. And get this, the damage over time used to be 60% attack power every few seconds, but now it's 10% attack power. So in terms of attack power, we have half power cut in half for the initial hit in terms of the attack power of the initial hit, and in cut in sixth for the dot itself. Which, if you were to, let's say, play Outlaw and try to have yourself a little bit of a rotation against a train dummy, try to get some damage up and running, I guess it shouldn't really be cleaving, try to mostly make it all a single target as it can be. The damage of this ability and where it's at right now is much, much lower. If I could put it right here. I mean, I doubt it's going to be bad. The initial hit is still going to be pretty decent, but it's nowhere near as strong as it used to be. This solves a couple issues because, well, if you're looking to play a rogue and you weren't really liking the idea of playing as a Necrolord, like maybe you didn't like the Mogs, maybe you didn't really care about the zone as much, maybe you felt like, man, I just don't want to be pressured, just feeling forced to play one ability. I want it to actually be a choice. I feel like this change will make it much easier for you to have that choice. Well, at least hopefully it will. Because you can see the damage is so much lower than it was. This, in comparison, this ability at the end of a dungeon run would be about 10 to 20% of your damage. It's basically a gushing wound as a Covenant ability. And now that Blizzard have actually finally nerfed it, we might legit have some more viable options. I'm personally happy about it in terms of that regard. Is it still going to be strong? Yes, I think it's really going to be strong because you can put a BONESPIKE on this guy, BONESPIKE on this guy, BONESPIKE on this guy. All of them are having damage over time every few seconds. And the more spikes you have out, the next spike is going to generate extra common points. So having 1, 2, 3, 4 BONESPIKEs out, 1 BONESPIKE, 5 common points. So you can go BONESPIKE, eviscerate, BONESPIKE, eviscerate, BONESPIKE, eviscerate if you wanted to. This ability is very low energy, very short cooldown, 3 charges. It's still very, very easy to use, but with how easy it is, it just made rogues flavor of the month. Everybody who wasn't a rogue was going subtlety, Necrolord, and that's it. There was just no way about it. Just go for the most amount of damage. So I'm a huge fan. I think this will still make this ability very strong. I think it's still going to be relevant. There was even other buffs to the Necrolord in terms of soul binds, which hopefully should even out the change to the rogue thing. But I'm kind of glad that BONESPIKE isn't just the top of the line, the best damage, and it's actually harder to figure out which one is it going to be, is the best ability. I think this ability is still going to be really strong. I'm just glad it doesn't do like, what, 10 to 20% of your damage. Hopefully it won't, at least at the end of the run. The next ability is going to be from the Kyrian, called the Echoing Reprimand. This ability has gotten a bit of a change, so let me go over exactly what happened. First of all, the damage got buffed. I think it does a little bit more than double the damage it used to do. So now it'll do 1,500 arcane damage, and I think there's a conduit for this ability that makes it even do more damage. Extract an animal from the enemy charging a common point for 45 seconds. I'll explain to you what that means. It now costs a lot less energy, from like 35 to 10, so you can use it all the time. Fairly short cooldown. Damage and finish a move that consumes the same amount of common points as the animate charge functions as the 7. So probably most of you guys don't play the Kyrian Rogue. You have no idea what this is. Most of you never even probably heard of this ever. So you would use the ability, it generates 3 common points, and it animate charges a common point to you. It could be 1 common point 1, common point 2, or common point 3. So now that I have 3 common points, it's animate charged. It'll function as if it works like a 7 common point finisher. So your dispatch will now do damage as if it consumes 7 common points. Same for between the eyes with the increased debuff duration. It won't work for your slice and dice. We thought in the Rogue Discord for a bit that maybe it'll work off of that, but Blizzard had originally a typo that says next finisher move will function as if it consumes 7 common points. It looks like the one back and changes to damage and finisher move. So this ability is still going to be increasing the output and performance of your next damage and ability to function like as if it's 7 common points. With a reduction to the energy cost for this ability, it might make it pretty good. It still is a little bit floaty in terms of like how many common points and you're gonna need for the next finisher. And if you're a sub rogue, your auto attacks generate a lot of common points, so sometimes you can like skip over the common points you're looking at. If you're an outlaw, your pistol shots and sin strikes can get random procs, so sometimes you don't really get to properly line up this damage and ability. You kind of just use this ability on cooldown, have an enemy charge common point if you get it while you're building common points. If you land on that common point that's anima charged, then I guess you would use the finisher. So there's still a little bit of question in terms of functionality of this ability and how it'll feel. But in terms of the damage performance now, I think it's actually in a much better spot. Just buffing this ability and with a conduit that will further make this ability even stronger, I think that might not really be a thing, or not really be as much of a thing to worry about. So the damage is actually better now, which I'm a huge fan of. The fact that I like how BONESPIKE is still ticking, by the way, but the damage is just much better. So at least they're trying to make this ability a little bit better, trying to buff the worst ability that rogues have seen so far, while also at the same time nerfing the strongest. In comparison, the Fae ability hasn't gotten any changes, and while I still think the Fae ability is very heavy leaning towards the other specs of Assassination Subtlety, as Outlaw doesn't really have nearly as much advantage in terms of the amount of damage it can do with its setup. I still think for Outlaw and just overall, in terms of how much damage this ability can do by itself, the extra elements of it resetting if it, the target dies before the damage over time component reaches its peak, I still think, at least now it's starting to look a little bit closer. Looking at, let's say, the Kyrian ability and the Necrolord ability in comparison, now I feel like with the changes, there's a bit more justification for the Fae, especially if you want to play sub, especially if you want to play Assass, especially if you really like stealth and you think PvP component of this ability might actually be good. Now I feel like there's a lot more, at least on paper, there's a lot more of a reason to even start considering other abilities. Maybe you really like the rogue aesthetic with the Fae and the transmogs, and you've always wanted to play it. Now might be the moment. Finally, I've also been waiting, and I did maybe like an hour and a half worth of quests for the event there just to unlock the conduit, which we do know that there's a new conduit being ready for the flagellation ability, where it's supposed to make flagellation stack up naturally every second. So instead of you having to build up common points, it'll just keep naturally ticking, which should increase its overall output and damage, and it should now do 4 lashes in the opener instead of 3 with the anima. But right now it doesn't work. I wanted to test to see if Slaughter Scars maybe has the wrong tooltip, but the application is there. And normally flagellation with this new change is supposed to stack up naturally by itself. It stacks up to 3 and it kind of just stops there. So right now, the current version of flagellation when it comes to the Covenant and conduits right now just isn't ready, and it's not properly working yet. So once it's working properly, I think I'll try to revisit it yet again. But as of right now, it doesn't seem like this ability, it still has some bugs, it still has some things that are weird about it. It doesn't fully function properly or how we think it should be functional, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And overall, when it comes to comparing Flagellation, the Kyrian ability, the Venthyr ability, the Necrolord ability, and the Fae, it now looks like it is a little bit of a closer competition, which I think is the perfect thing where Blizzard should have been heading in the right direction. And it really comes down to the balancing things, really comes down to the soul binds. The closer Blizzard can make it, the better. And I guess it's really going to be up for you guys to decide if you think they're doing a good job trying to make these Covenant choices and abilities a little bit more competitive and a little bit harder for people to choose, rather looking like, oh, there's obviously this one ability that's just miles better than everything else. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for checking out this update with Rogues. It's going to be quite a lot of video and quite a bit of footage of me just editing all this together because of a big gap between where we started and where we are now. But hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one.